6 little girls vanished without a trace. No bodies, no clues, no indication of where they have gone. And the couple believed to be responsible behind it. Well, as soon as they got wind that the police were onto them, after a dramatic shootout on a Pretoria bridge, they would take their own lives, taking the secrets of what they had done to the little girls to the grave with them. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be reopening the case of Gert van Rooyen and Joan Haarhoff, one of South Africa's most infamous couples and serial killing couples. And we are going to be digging into the deepest cases that are buried in South African soil. Now, if you like what I do, consider subscribing, consider hitting the like button, because some stories deserved to be told even after the dust has settled on them after 50 years. Now I'm going to set the scene for you. This is Pretoria. This is apartheid era, so there is segregation that is going on. Little girls, specifically with blonde hair and blue-eyed eyes, are being targeted by a predator. A predator that's crimes are so horrendous, so horrific, that he will be forever solidified as one of the worst men in South African history. And his name is Gert van Rooyen. And he preferred those girls with the blonde hair and the blue eyes, as he would say to people who would laugh it off, that he liked them when they sat on a chair, that their feet couldn't touch the ground. Now I'm going to start with naming the 6 victims who are still missing. Their bodies have to this date still not been found. There are 6 girls, 6 childhood bedrooms that will never again have any laughter, and they are still all young, all under the age of 14. They are Tracy-Lee Scott-Crossley, 14, Fiona Harvey, 12 years old, Joan, 12 years old, Odette Boucher, 11 years old, Anne-Marie Wapenaar, 12 years old, as well as Yolanda Wessels, 13. And she was Joan Haarhoff's own niece. Yep, she was her own niece. Now, between 1988 and 1990s, these girls disappeared in public in broad daylight. No bodies were ever recovered, no remains, no clothing, nothing. And the mystery still remains, because these families have never received any closure for what has happened to their children. But this didn't start up with a van pulling up next to a child. This didn't start off with Joan Haarhoff wearing a wig, luring girls to her. This story started with something far more calculated. To understand the horror that unfolded, we need to meet the monsters behind it. But monsters, are they born or are they made? Comment below what you think, because we're going to get behind the history of these 2 people who are responsible for some of South Africa's most horrendous crimes. Now, as I mentioned earlier, these offences occurred during apartheid, especially in areas of Pretoria where there were strongholds of Afrikaans people. And in the last decade of apartheid, the culture was struggling because of theories such as the Satanic Panic was happening in the 1980s and 1990s. It occurred in South Africa as well as in the States. The society of rigid beliefs that were reinforced by the Dutch Reformed Church, and it was starting almost to lose its bearings a little bit because of the introduction of substances, of adult materia. Family breakdowns were occurring, divorce rates were increasing, as well as self-unalivings, if you know what I mean. I have to use those words. Gert van Rooyen and Joan Haarhoff came around, and they would catapult themselves into infamy due to the crimes that they committed, because these are 2 Afrikaans people who are busy committing crimes against Afrikaans children. Cornelius Gert van Rooyen, which I'll be referring to as Gert van Rooyen, he was the oldest of 4 children. He was born on the 11th of April 1938, and he was always known by his nickname Bokkie. He lived on his family on a house in Bloedstraat, which means Blood Street. I don't know if that could have been some foreshadowing for what would have happened next, perhaps so. But we know that Gert van Rooyen, he would struggle with crime throughout his life. When he was 16 years old, he stole a car and he drove from Cape Town to Johannesburg in order to visit his dying mother, according to his own account. And that was when he was only 16 years old. He was sentenced to reform for corrective training, whatever that means. But he went back there a year later for stealing another car as well as a rifle. And in 1960, he was imprisoned for stealing motor parts and clothing. And we know that a lot of these offenders, they start off with committing petty crimes before they increase them, before they escalate into more serious crimes. Gert earned a living running a construction business with his brothers, repairing roofs among other activities. He's been also known as a contractor to install pools. There have been a few theories online about Jane Does who have been uncovered under pools in the Pretoria and Randburg area because of all the installations that Gert van Rooyen did. But how successful that business was is debatable, but he did never seem to be short of money. He was a very flashy guy and he would show his money all over the place. He traveled between Randburg and Durban for work, and this is a common thing that is brought up because along the way he became familiar with the roads and the routes, perhaps areas where he could dump bodies. And there's also another theory going around on the web that he was part of a ring that focused on children and that he would ship the children off to Durban, but this is just a theory. This has not been proven in any way. Now, whatever he was doing, he had a lot of security in his house, which is perhaps not unusual in South Africa today, but in the 1980s, this was unusual to have that much security. And he never parked his car outside. He always made sure to park his car in the garage or in the car park. And visitors had to be let in through a security gate. It makes me wonder, what was Gert van Rooyen trying to keep in or out? What secrets was he trying to keep in his house with that level of security? And he was also described as someone who was very flamboyant. He was known as a very religious person and a God-fearing man, and he claimed often to be a preacher. Now, we know that he had a bunch of relationships or marriages. His first marriage was in 1957 when he had 4 children, and then after the divorce, his mother was left to raise the 4 children. When he was 26, he married his second wife, and then he had another 6 children with her. We know that Gert was probably never faithful to any of these women, and for example, when his second wife would confront him, he would allegedly become violent with her after these confrontations. And in 1987, he married for the 3rd time, because after he came back from prison, his wife had enough of him and divorced him, his second wife, so he married for the 3rd time in 1987. And this woman left him a week after they got married, and she filed for divorce 2 months later. So I don't know what happened in that week, but something hectic must have happened in that week for her to so abruptly get up and leave. Now, we know that Gert van Rooyen would collect newspaper ads, and he would look at women advertising for friends on newspaper. That's how they did it in those days. There was no Tinder. And he would constantly advertise for secretaries, but his secretaries would never last long. He had a son with a woman who he was seeing on the side, who they did not marry, and she used to worship the ground that he walked on. She thought that there was nothing wrong with him, despite other people warning her that he was a psychopath who had been jailed. And even to this day, she still allegedly remembers him as a charming gentleman. We do not know any history from what he did towards young girls until 1979. So in 1979, we know that Gert van Rooyen abducted 2 girls, aged 10 and 13, and he took them to the Hartbeespoort Dam. they were at a Christmas party, and he abducted them and took them to the Hartbeespoort Dam, which is near Pretoria, and he SA'd them, if you know what I mean. And he dropped the girls off the next day, and they went to go and report it, and he was arrested, and he underwent a psychiatric evaluation, which was normal at the time, and he was diagnosed as a pathological liar, as well as he had psychopathic personality disorder. So he has been diagnosed by a mental professional at that stage of having psychiatric personality, and he was only sentenced to 4 years in prison for abduction, SA, and assault. And that seems like a very light sentence to me, and I often think, what would have happened if he had been sentenced for longer? Could those girls have been saved? Because 4 years for that type of act even seems very light for me. Comment below if you agree with me. And he only served 3 years before he was released from prison, and he was described as a model prisoner. He got a year early release, and he was deemed fit to interact back into society. So I do think that this was a pivotal turning point for him, because Gert had abducted 2 girls, and when he had released them, they had told. And I think going forward, Gert realized that in order to be successful with his crimes, in order to fulfill his sick needs, that he would need to make sure that there were no more witnesses to the crimes. And unfortunately, this is a pattern that we see a lot with serial offenders. The next girls that he would meet, he would make sure that they were silenced forever. We also know that there have been a bunch of theories online. For example, talking about the pool. I read recently about a Jane Doe that was discovered under a pool, and it is a pool that is believed to be associated with a company that Gert van Rooyen subcontracted for. And under that pool was found the remains of a young black woman. Now, Gert van Rooyen definitely had a preferred type of girl, which was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, and he would often say to people that their feet must not touch the ground. That is how he liked them. And nowadays this would be a real red flag, but then I don't know why he wasn't more widely reported. But what we do know is that we have indications from a domestic worker who used to work from him that Gert van Rooyen would refuse to pay her unless she bought him young black girls from the township. So we do know that there are possibly hundreds of girls who have been victimized, who have been murdered and SA'd by Gert van Rooyen across all racial groups, but we simply do not know about them because of apartheid. It makes tracking so difficult to link these missing girls with Gert van Rooyen. Now, the case about the black lady that was found under the pool, True Crime South Africa, she did an episode on that. It's called the Meadowbrook Doe, if you would. What also we know about Gert van Rooyen is that he was, I would describe as a local sex pest. So girls would describe that he would hang over their gates, leer at them, whistle at them, tell them that they were very sexy and very nice. And he is said to have told people about some of his, SAing of young girls, some as young as 5 years old. But it was often done, from what I've read, in a jokingly way or an exaggerating way. And people didn't think anything of it. They thought that he was just strange, that he was bragging about things that he perhaps didn't do. And it was never reported, which I do think it should have been. His second wife was willing to take him back after prison, but she found out that he was still busy. He had almost like this religious ideation where he would preach all the time, and he was described as a very God-fearing man. My father was a young boy in church with Gert van Rooyen, And my father told me that Gert van Rooyen was a deacon at their church, and that they would have to play the piano for him. And he described him as a very God-fearing man as well. But we know that behind closed doors, he was busy committing all these crimes. By 1987, Gert van Rooyen and Joey Haarhoff would become a couple. Joey Haarhoff is probably just as disturbing as Gert van Rooyen. Full name was Francina Joanna Hermine Haarhoff, but she went by the name of Joey. And she was an attractive woman. She was very popular in Pretoria. She used to go to church. She was in her 50s. And she had a brief first marriage, and is believed that perhaps she lost a pregnancy due to abuse. We know that she remarried and had a bunch of children, 4 children, and that her husband sadly passed away in the mid-80s, and they left her as a widow. And she used to work as a debtor's clerk, as an accounts clerk, and she was just basically that typical lower middle class Afrikaans woman from Pretoria who used to attend church, bake cook sisters. And I think Gert recognized this in her, because Gert recognized that in those days also you were told to listen to your elders, you were told to respect your elders. If an elder tells you to do something, you do it. And Joey Haarhoff, she would be used to lure these girls to Gert van Rooyen. And I think that she was so good at it, because she just looked like an ordinary 50-year-old Afrikaans woman who went to church, who you could trust. And that is why it was so successful what they did. From some accounts, when they first met, she did not even like Gert, because at this time Gert was aging. He was going bald, and he would sometimes wear wigs. We also know that he wasn't as good looking as she was, and she had her reservations at the beginning. We also know that she knew about his past marriages and all these children that he had with all these different women. But psychopaths have this ability to reel you in when they want you, and I think that is what Gert did with her. Gert reeled Jody in and sort of entranced her, and she almost started worshipping him, much like that other woman who he had a child with, who he never married. And he charmed her, and he love bombed her, I think, and she started to worship him. And we know that they never married, but Gert van Rooyen had a vicious sexual appetite. We know that Joey would complain about how many times Gert wanted it a day, and that it was extreme. This is also something that we see with serial killers and serial offenders, is oftentimes their wives would complain. Gary Ridgway comes to mind about how often they demanded to have interrelations, sometimes multiple times in days where women's bodies just simply cannot handle it. We also know that Gert was violent with Joey, and that he had absolute control over her, and that is the way that he liked it. He was the one who was in control of his children, in control of Jody. And we know that he would eventually use Joey to help lure girls in with him. Now, with a lot of serial offenders, they are driven by fantasies, and Gert, they sort of build themselves up where they just go, where the cooling off period between their crimes becomes less and less, because these fantasies, they sort of take over their minds. And Gert van Rooyen, this is where we had a turning point where he met Joey, because I believe he realized that he could use Joey to abduct girls and get away with it, because at the end of the day, girls and women are not as suspicious when other women approach you. I've mentioned this in a lot of human trafficking cases that I've covered, where oftentimes women are used to lure other women into it. Think of Ghislaine Maxwell with Jeffrey Epstein, and how they use some of the other younger girls to lure more younger girls in. There is a case where I have covered of a human trafficker survivor, who she has told me that she was recruited by another woman. And this is something, because you let your guard down, You let your guard down, I think, when another woman approaches you. And Gert van Rooyen knew that in order for his fantasies, for him to be successful in these fantasies, that he would need a womanly figure. And perhaps Joey was just the right amount of what he needed. He knew that he could control her, that he could manipulate her, and that she would do everything in her power for him. Now, we don't know if Joey participated in the abuse once the girls were abducted. There is only one survivor who managed to survive the ordeal, and we'll get to her story later. But what we do know is that Joey would do anything for Gert van Rooyen. When she knew that police were onto her, and in those days it was capital punishment in South Africa, so she knew that they used to still hang people back then. So she knew that when she was caught, she was either going to go to prison for the rest of her life, or she was going to be hanged by the neck until dead. And she wrote 2 letters just before she died. So in a letter to her mother, Joey writes that she knows that self-unaliving herself is a sin, and that she hopes that God will save her soul, and that her mother will forgive her for any hurt that she's caused. And but another thing is that Joey says that Gert loved her so deeply. He gave her a love, Gert loved her so deeply, he gave her a love that no one else did. And his ex-wife, and that she hoped that his ex-wife would see that they were buried in one grave, so she could be with God. Then, a spoiler alert, they were buried separately, so they were not buried in the same grave. Now, the night before her death, Joey sends her will to her sister, and in the will she writes a letter, and she sort of says to the abductions, she talks about only one of the victims, which is Joan, who we think is Joan Boyson, and she says the reason that she helped Gert abduct her was because they wanted ransom from the father, who was a police officer. Now, this is all very untrue. The reason that they abducted her was for Gert's sexual proclivities. Now, what we know is that this is complete denial from Joey. It's almost as if she doesn't want to acknowledge the crimes, the sexual crimes component that is occurring here. And she left all of her possessions to her son, who is going to make a mention for committing a crime later on. So keep watching until the end, because one of Gert's children was sentenced for murder, and Joey's son has been sentenced in, I think it is New Zealand, for SA of minors, but we'll get to them at the end. And she left everything she had a few children, but she left everything to the son, because he's the only one who supported Joey's relationship with Gert. And in the will, she blasted her 2 other children who did not support her relationship with Gert, and they did not receive anything in her will, but she was prepared to forgive them for the hurt that they had caused her. Now, this is obviously someone, in these letters, we sort of get a little bit of Joey's personality. We can see that she is, I think, someone who is deeply vindictive, who is trying to maintain the moral high ground when she is essentially walking all over it. Joey says that she is going to heaven, and that she is going to be in heaven with Gert van Rooyen. Now, I don't know if she was delusional or what, but she said she was free from all her earthly things that were binding to, and basically that she was going to live forever happily after in heaven with Jesus and with Gert van Rooyen after doing this to all these children. Now, Joey's daughter, the one who was excluded from the will because she did not approve of the relationship between Gert and Joey, she wrote her own book on this matter, describing her relationship with her mother growing up, SA'd by her father from a young age. He was a military man, and he would come home from the base and he would SA her, and then her grandmother found out about it. The grandmother found out about it, and the grandmother told Joey, and Joey allegedly said that she knew what was happening but did nothing to stop it. And if anything, this makes her a passive participant in the abuse. And there are also suspicions that Joey herself was SA'd when she was a child. We know that people, not all of them, but people who have suffered abuse as a child, that they can become abusers when they are older, but this is not always the case. This is just the case for some people. There are many people who escape situations like this and they never abuse anyone in their life. Gert van Rooyen was known to use Joey to lure girls in. Like I said earlier, it was, it's a bit strange for him to be going around to orphanages asking for girls to spend holidays with them. But that is what he got Joey to do. He got Joey to go call around orphanages, say, hey, listen, we're going on holiday to KZN, to a Mams and Toti. Why don't one of your girls come with us? We like the blonde-haired and blue-eyed girls especially. And we know that they even tried to adopt children, but these applications were denied. Joey's applications were denied for adopting children. So the first victim, which occurred on the 1st of August 1988, was 14-year-old Tracy-Lee Scott-Crossley. She was only 14 years old, and she disappeared from Cresta Shopping Center near Randburg. It's an area in Johannesburg. Like I said, very like middle to low Afrikaans, middle class area. My father grew up there. And she was last seen climbing into a Volkswagen Beetle out of the shopping center. Now remember, in those days, you are told to respect your elders. And if an elder says come with me, then you go with them. That's just how things were those days. And please no victim blaming in the comments below, because a nationwide police search would launch for Tracy-Lee Scott-Crossley, but they would not find anything. Then on a few months later, on the 22nd of December 1988, 12-year-old Fiona Harvey, she would disappear. She was from Pietermaritzburg, and she was seen getting into a white Ford Bantam Bakkie, and now we know that the same Bakkie would be linked to Gert van Rooyen. It was the same Bakkie that he used with his construction business that he had with his brothers, and he would actually print it on business adverts and distribute them. So that was later, his Bakkie was later linked to them. Then on the 7th of June 1989, 12-year-old Joan Horn of Pretoria disappeared. And then on 9 July 1989, 16-year-old Janet Dalport of Durban disappeared after being abducted in a shopping mall by a blonde woman. We know that Joey, she had naturally dark hair, but she would wear wigs when she was doing these abductions. And she was later found wandering, distressed but unharmed. Now, we don't know what exactly happened there. I've personally been unable to find information as to what happened there, but maybe this is me speculating, maybe they realized that she was a bit too old for them. We don't know what happened, but she was later released and she was severely traumatized by that experience. Now, Gert van Rooyen and Joey Haarhoff have never been charged for any of these kidnappings. These are just disappearances that happened around the time and are alleged to be attributed to them, because we know that some weeks later, on the 22nd of September 1989, 11-year-old Odette Boucher would disappear, along with, around that same time, 12-year-old Anne-Marie Wapenaar. And they were both from Kempton Park. It's another area in Johannesburg that I'm familiar with, also a very Afrikaans area. And in a strange turn of events, a week later, on the 29th of September 1989, Anne-Marie's mother received a letter saying that she and Odette Boucher had run away to Durban with some boys. And we know that Odette also wrote a letter with the same thing, saying that I've run away with Anne-Marie to go and meet some boys. But it was suspected that these letters were written under duress and that they had been forced to write these letters by either Gert van Rooyen or Joey Haarhoff. And then on the 3rd of November 1989, 13-year-old Yolanda Wessels, the niece of Van Rooyen's partner, Joey Haarhoff, disappeared. Now, that is going very close to home, in my own opinion. And it's also very brazen, because before now, they have targeted girls at shopping centers. They have targeted girls, they've targeted girls at shopping centers. They've sort of picked them out, you know, from crowds. Whereas now they are targeting family members. And this for me just shows that the couple is becoming very brazen. Perhaps even on some level they want to get caught. Now, on the 11th of January 1999, this is where the game changer happens, because they abducted 16-year-old Joan Boyson of Pretoria. And she was abducted by Joey Haarhoff in the Church Square of Pretoria. And she was the surviving victim. So we know she's the survivor. So we know what happened according to her account. She was taken to Van Rooyen's home in Malaba Street. Remember that home that is described as a fortress. I wonder why, to keep people out or to keep people in. And she describes being handcuffed. She was given substances to make her drowsy. She was SA'd by Van Rooyen, and she was locked in a cupboard. And she was 16 years old, but I think Van Rooyen and Joey Haarhoff, they thought that she was much younger because she was a very small build, and she managed to escape and alert the police to what happened to her. Now, police went to go and place the home under surveillance, and they later identified Van Rooyen when he drove past that house in that Ford Bantam Bakkie that has been matched to one of the other abductions. And we know that they perhaps knew that the gig was up. They knew that their victim had gone, and that is when Jody Haarhoff starts writing all these letters to her sister, to her mother, because they obviously, perhaps, this is me speculating, they discussed a plan that they were going to perhaps self-unalive themselves instead of go to jail, instead of face the noose, because in those days it was capital punishment. And we know that Van Rooyen shot and killed Haarhoff with a .22 revolver before he shot himself with a different gun. And like I said, they were not buried together, even though it was Joey Haarhoff's dying wish. Now, all of these disappearances have been linked to Gert van Rooyen. So, for example, Odette Boucher's home address and phone number were found written on a piece of paper and hidden under a carpet in his garage, as well as her class captain's bag and yellow badge. We know that these serial predators, they often keep mementos from their crimes from the victims so that they can use it when they re-fantasize about it, like to show that they actually committed the crime and it wasn't just a fantasy. We know that Annie-Marie Wapenaar's address and home keys, as well as envelopes and paper that were used for that writing, which we suspect was under duress, were found in his home. And none of the victims' bones have ever been found, despite extensive police searches, premises of the Haarhoffs, which was dubbed the House of Horrors by the press. Now, in 1996, Absa Bank donated Van Rooyen's former house to the police to allow the disappearances to be investigated. We know that the house was demolished, that they even went through the roof with a hairdryer. They even went through the vacuum in order to see if they could pick up any forensic evidence, but there was essentially nothing. They scanned the place with sonar. The soil in the bone was sifted, and some bones were found, but they were identified as animal bones. Now, Gert van Rooyen's legacy has continued through his son, and this is more of a case if you think monsters are born or if monsters are made, because we know the one, Flippy van Rooyen, he was facing charges of life imprisonment after being charged with the murder of a 15-year-old Zimbabwean girl. We also know that he was found guilty of perjury after giving police conflicting accounts of what happened to those girls during Gert van Rooyen's time, because at one time he made allegations that Gert van Rooyen was in a satanic ring and that there was ritual abuse going on and that they were members of the National Party involved. And I must say, this is all allegations made by him. None of this has been proven. We also know that another family member was sentenced to 15 years in prison for fraud. And we also have another case of Gert's daughter who claimed to have been stabbed over 50 times by two teenage Satanists in Scottsboro, KwaZulu-Natal in 1995. The police discounted the allegations at the time and basically said that she is believed to have stabbed herself. And she was also charged with fraud and perverting the ends of justice. And Joey's son as well has gone on to commit crime. Remember that one son that she left everything to, the one that supported her relationship to with Gert van Rooyen. Well, he immigrated to New Zealand and he was found guilty of SAing a young girl in New Zealand, and he was charged and sentenced. Now, that is the strange case of the Van Rooyens. Comment below what you think.